Captain Reed shoved Audrey against the wall and jabbed a finger in her face. "You're going to get us all killed just by being here. Do you understand me? Stay back. Stay quiet. Stay out of the way." She didn't flinch. She didn't argue. She just looked at him with eyes that held something he couldn't name and smiled the smallest, quietest smile he had ever seen on a soldier about to enter a war zone. If you love stories about people who prove everyone wrong in the most devastating way possible, subscribe to this channel and follow this story until the very end. And drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The morning Audrey Callahan arrived at Forward Operations Base Kestrel, nobody paid attention to her. That was the first mistake. She came in on the second supply truck, the one that arrived 40 minutes late because a rear axle had been acting up since Barstow. She climbed down from the cab without anyone helping her, which was fine because she didn't wait for help. She had a worn canvas duffel over one shoulder and a hard-sided equipment case in her right hand, the kind of case that got a second glance, then a shrug, because intelligence specialists were always carrying equipment cases full of things and nobody understood and nobody asked about. She signed in at the security desk, received her bunk assignment, her meal schedule, and a laminated sheet of base protocols, and then she walked across the compound to her assigned quarters without speaking a word to anyone. Corporal Tanya Briggs, who was manning the desk that morning, would later tell the people that the woman had given off a vibe she couldn't quite explain. "Not nervous," Tanya said. "Not cold either, just contained, like everything was already sorted out in her head, and she was just moving through the physical steps." Nobody thought much about Audrey Callahan on day one. They were thinking about the mission. 3 weeks of field intelligence had confirmed that a paramilitary cell operating under the name Black Meridian had established a command infrastructure inside an abandoned copper mining complex 18 miles outside Red Rock Canyon. These were not amateur fighters. Black Meridian recruited from collapsed special operations units across 4 different countries. Men who knew tactics, knew weapons, knew how to anticipate the moves of government-trained soldiers because they had been government-trained soldiers themselves. They had executed 2 successful ambushes in the previous 4 months, both against well-armed federal units, both leaving no survivors to debrief. The mission to neutralize their command center had been assigned to Captain Mason Reed's tactical response team. 12 operators, all with combat experience, all with high clearances, all with the kind of track records that made brass feel comfortable signing off on complex operations. Reed had been running this kind of work for 11 years. He was 38, lean and deliberate in everything he did, the kind of commander who thought 3 steps ahead and slept 4 hours a night because his brain wouldn't stop processing. He had received the mission package 6 days before deployment, had studied it until he could have recited every entry point, every known guard rotation, every structural weakness of the mining facility from memory. He was confident. Not arrogant. Mason Reed didn't do arrogant, but confident. The kind of steady, grounded confidence that comes from doing hard things correctly for a long time. And then 2 days before the operation launched, someone slid a personnel update across his desk. Specialist Audrey Callahan, Intelligence Division, would be attached to the unit for the duration of the mission. Reed had stared at the paper for a long moment. Then he walked down the hall to the office of Major Harold Voss, who oversaw personnel assignments and knocked on the doorframe because the door was already open. "Tell me about the intelligence specialist," Reed said. Voss looked up from his monitor. "Callahan, she's good. Cleared experience, no incidents on record." "What's her field experience?" "She's done 6 attached operations, intel and comm support mostly." "Mostly," Reed repeated. "She's an asset captain. She'll be monitoring communications intercepts and helping you adapt if the tactical picture shifts." "I don't need someone monitoring comms. I need operators." "You're getting both," Voss said, and his tone made clear that the conversation was over. Reed walked out without another word. He went back to his mission planning, added Callahan to his internal threat management calculations, not as a combatant, but as a liability. Someone he'd need to position away from direct contact, and didn't think about her again until the morning she arrived. He met her formally during the first full unit briefing, which took place in the operations room at 0600 on day 2. 12 operators around a long table, maps and surveillance photos spread across every surface, the ventilation system humming overhead. Reed stood at the front and walked them through the mission structure with the controlled precision that his team had come to expect. Entry points, timing, communication protocols, contingencies. Audrey sat at the far end of the table. She didn't take notes, which Reed noticed immediately, because everyone else was either writing or typing. She just listened. Her hands were folded on the table in front of her. Her equipment case was on the floor beside her chair. At one point, Reed asked if there were questions. Sergeant Logan Pierce, his weapons specialist, asked about the guard rotation on the eastern perimeter. Lieutenant Ethan Caldwell, his comms operator, asked about backup frequencies in case of jamming. Two other operators asked about extraction timing. Audrey Callahan said nothing. After the briefing, Reed's second-in-command, Sergeant First Class Diana Reyes, fell into step beside him in the corridor. The intel specialist didn't ask a single question, Reyes said. I noticed, Reed said. Either she already knows everything we discussed, or she doesn't understand enough to know what she doesn't know. Either way, we put her in the secondary position during the breach, away from the contact points. Reyes glanced back over her shoulder toward the operations room where Audrey was still seated. She's strange. She's a liability, Reed said. We manage it. That night, he lay on his bunk and ran through the mission variables again. Weather, entry timing, enemy positioning, equipment readiness. He got to Audrey Callahan and spent about 4 seconds on her secondary position, away from contact. Nobody needs to babysit her, but nobody leaves her exposed, and moved on. He didn't know that in the bunk 3 rooms down the hall, Audrey Callahan was not asleep either. She was reading the mission package. Not her copy, which was limited to the Intelligence Division summary she'd been provided. She was reading a full version of the tactical package, which she had been cleared to access through a separate authorization that had never been mentioned to Reed, because the people who authorized it had decided he didn't need to know. She read through his entire plan with careful attention, and when she was finished, she sat with it for a while. Then she opened the equipment case and checked what was inside, which she did the same way a surgeon might check their instruments before an operation. Not because she doubted they were there, but because some habits were worth maintaining. She closed the case and went to sleep. On the morning of the operation, Reed conducted a final equipment check at 043 AM. He moved down the line of his operators with practiced efficiency, eyeing loadouts and weapon configurations, asking short questions and getting shorter answers. When he reached Audrey, she had her duffel in her equipment case. He looked at the case. What's in there? He asked. Field analysis equipment, she said. He studied her face for a moment. She looked back at him with that same contained quality that Tanya Briggs had tried to describe. Not nervous, not cold, just settled. You stay in the secondary position once we're inside, he said. You do not advance without my direct authorization. If contact is made, you find cover and stay there until one of my operators reaches you. Understood, she said. I mean it. You are not a combatant on this operation. I understand my role, Captain. Something about the way she said it. Not defensive, not dismissive, just absolutely level made him pause for half a second. Then he moved on to the next operator because there was no time for half-second pauses. They loaded into 2 vehicles at Euro 500 and drove into the desert as the sky was just beginning to separate itself from black into something dark blue and serious. The mining facility came into view at 0618. From the outside, it looked exactly like the surveillance photos, a collection of deteriorating industrial structures arranged around a central processing building, the whole complex enclosed by a perimeter fence that was in visible disrepair. The kind of place that looked completely abandoned from a distance and was supposed to look that way. Reed gave the signal and his team moved. The first breach was clean. They cut through the fence at the designated point without triggering any visible response and moved toward the eastern building in a tight formation. Audrey stayed in position 20 feet behind the lead element, equipment case in hand. For 6 minutes, everything tracked exactly with the plan. Then Logan Pierce, moving ahead on point, raised a closed fist. Everyone stopped. The silence that followed had a texture to it too. Complete, too organized, the kind of quiet that isn't empty, but full. Reed felt the hair on the back of his neck stand up before he consciously understood why. Pierce's voice came over the earpiece, barely above a breath. We've got footprints in the dust on the east side, fresh. A lot of them. This position was occupied in the last few hours. Reed's jaw tightened. Hold, he said into the comms. Caldwell moved up beside him. Cap, getting signal interference on channels 2 and 4. Partial block. Partial, like something suppressing from inside the perimeter. Reed ran the math fast. Signal suppression. Fresh foot traffic at a position that was supposed to be clear. A facility that had been quiet for 48 hours before their arrival. They knew we were coming, Pierce said quietly. He said it the same way you'd say the building is on fire, not panicked, just reporting a terrible fact. Reed's mind locked onto the next decision without wasting time on reaction. Reyes, north approach, take Hernandez and Davis flank to the secondary exit. Pierce, you're with me. Caldwell, keep working those channels. Channels 2 and 4 are fully blocked now, Caldwell said. Channel 1 is... The explosion came from the north end of the facility. Not massive, a shaped charge, precise and deliberate, placed exactly where their secondary exit route had been mapped. The sound of it rolled through the structure, and Reed felt it in his chest, and in the silence that followed, he heard something even worse, the sound of organized enemy movement converging from 3 directions at once. Contact, Pierce said, and the word barely finished before the first shots came in. The team fractured into cover positions. Reed pulled back behind a ruined loading platform, the concrete around him, eating bullets in steady, controlled bursts. He did the accounting, fast and brutal. Worth exit destroyed channels 2 and 4, dead contact from 3 vectors. Pierce was already reporting a graze on his left arm that was going to slow him down. They were contained. He pressed his back against the concrete and breathed through the calculation. 12 operators, now 11 effective, with Pierce compromised. Enemy numbers unknown, but their fire discipline was strong. Meaning trained, meaning this wasn't going to break easily. Extraction was 30 minutes out, even if he could call it in, and Caldwell still hadn't confirmed a clean channel. He looked across the 15 feet of open space between his position and where Audrey Callahan was crouched behind a support column. She was not panicking. She was watching, not watching the incoming fire, not watching her cover, not watching any of the things that people watch when they are afraid. She was watching the muzzle flash patterns. She was watching the intervals between bursts. She was tracking something that nobody else in that moment had the mental bandwidth to track. Reed made the crossing, in 3 seconds landing behind the column beside her. "We are in serious trouble," he said, keeping his voice flat. "I need you to stay behind this column and do not move until..." "They're not trying to kill you yet," she said. He stopped. "What? Look at the fire pattern," she said. "They're shooting high and wide on the north and east. They're not aiming to eliminate. They're aiming to move you." Reed turned his head and looked, and after a moment he saw it. The fire from the north was pushing his elements south. The fire from the east was pushing them toward the center of the complex. Not kill shots, control shots. "They want to funnel us into the central building," and he said. "Where they'll have everything prepared," Audrey said. "They set this up ahead of your arrival, which means they had your plan, or a version of it. The ambush isn't a response, it's been staged." "How long have you been tracking this?" "Since Pierce found the footprints." He stared at her for a moment, this quiet woman he had been planning to position away from contact, this analyst. He had filed under liability in his operational calculus, and he felt something shift in his understanding. "Not everything, not yet, but something." "What do we do?" he said. It wasn't quite a question, because he had his own answer forming, but he said it anyway because she had just proved she was seeing things he wasn't. "You need to stop moving where they want you to move," she said. "Hold your current positions and make them work to advance instead of reacting to their pressure. If you keep retreating toward the center, you hand them everything." Reed keyed his comms. "All elements hold position. Do not fall back towards central. I say again, hold." The acknowledgments came back in quick succession. Pierce's was the last, and it was strained, but it came. The firing pattern shifted almost immediately. The controlled pressure of the enemy formation changed hesitation in the timing, a brief reorganization. They had expected the team to keep moving. Reed watched the change happen, and he felt it confirmed something he was only beginning to understand. He turned back to Audrey. "Who are you?" he said. And she looked at him with those contained, settled eyes and said, "Right now, I'm the person who can get your team out of this. But you're going to have to trust me." The equipment case was on the ground beside her. She put her hand on it. And Mason Reed, 11-year veteran of impossible operations, looked at the case and then looked at her and felt the ground shift under everything he had assumed since the moment her name appeared on his personnel update. "Open it," he said. She did. Inside was not a laptop, not a signals analyzer, not any piece of intelligence equipment that he could identify. Inside, nested in precision-cut foam, was a rifle that Mason Reed recognized immediately, not because it was common, but because it was the opposite of common. A long-range precision instrument that almost nobody carried, because almost nobody could use it effectively at the distances it was designed for. The kind of tool that existed at the intersection of engineering and a very specific and very rare human capability. "You're a sniper," he said. She had already begun assembling it. Her hands moved with the quiet efficiency of someone doing something they had done 10,000 times. "The case," he said, and his voice came out slightly strange. "You've been carrying that since before the briefing." "Since before I arrived," she said. "Who knows, the people who need to." "I'm the mission commander," Reed said, and he heard something he didn't recognize in his own voice. Not anger exactly, though there was anger somewhere underneath it. Something more complicated. The feeling of having built an entire operational structure on an understanding that was wrong. "I needed to know." "If you'd known," she said, still assembling, still not looking up, "you would have planned around it. You would have positioned me as the primary offensive asset and built your approach on my capability, and Black Meridian would have identified the pattern. My role works because nobody knows it exists until it's already working." He opened his mouth to argue. A burst of fire tore through the column above their heads, and concrete dust showered down on both of them. She didn't flinch. The rifle was assembled. She checked it with a focus so complete it was almost meditative, and then she looked up at him for the first time since she'd opened the case, and her eyes were different now. Not warmer, not colder, just more fully what they had always been, the eyes of someone who had been here before in this exact quality of crisis and knew with absolute precision what came next. "I need 40 seconds to get to an elevated position," she said. "I need your team to hold enemy attention for those 40 seconds and then hold it for the next 10 minutes while I work." "What are you going to do in 10 minutes?" Reed said. "End this," she said simply. He wanted to push back. He was the mission commander. He had a plan, or what was left of one. He had 11 years of experience telling him that operations collapsed when the structure broke down, when individuals started running their own solutions without coordination. But the structure had already broken. The plan was gone, and the woman he had categorized as a liability was holding a rifle she had assembled in under 60 seconds while bullets hit the column above them, and her hands were completely steady, and she was looking at him like she had already calculated the outcome of this conversation and was simply waiting for him to reach the conclusion she had already reached. Reed keyed his comms. "All elements, I need a coordinated distraction on my mark. Full noise, full movement, make them think we're pushing south. 30 seconds. He looked at Audrey. She was already moving low and fluid toward the back wall and the staircase that led to the upper level. "Callahan," he said. She stopped and looked back. "Don't miss," he said. She looked at him for just a moment, and something crossed her face, not quite a smile, but the shadow of one. "I don't," she said. Then she was gone, moving through the damaged interior of the facility like she had studied the floor plan as carefully as he had, maybe more carefully, and Reed pressed his back against the column and waited for the 40 seconds that would determine whether anyone on his team went home. He keyed the comms. "All elements, on my mark, make it loud." He drew a breath. Mark. The facility erupted with controlled chaos. His team executing the distraction with the discipline of people who trusted their commander, even when the plan had already burned. Fire from 6 positions, movement noise, exactly the kind of aggressive unpredictability that forced an enemy to respond and recalculate. And somewhere above them, moving through shadows and dust and the geometry of a building she had studied from maps and memory, Audrey Callahan reached her position. Reed pressed himself against the wall, managed Pierce's wound with a pressure wrap while keeping his voice level, tracked his team's positions through the comms and counted 40 seconds, then 50, then at 57 seconds, a shot rang out from above that was completely unlike the firefight around it. Precise, deliberate, a single note in a composition of noise, and one of the enemy machine gun positions went silent. Just like that. Gone. The pause in enemy fire that followed was only about 4 seconds, but 4 seconds of silence in a firefight is a geological age. And then it happened again. Reed looked up toward the upper level and could see nothing, which meant she had already moved. She wasn't at the position where she'd fired from. She was somewhere else. And the enemy knew it too. He could hear it in the change of their communications. The sharp calls back and forth between positions. The note of something entering their coordination that hadn't been there before. The note was uncertainty, and somewhere above him, in the damaged upper reaches of an abandoned mining facility, 18 miles from Red Rock Canyon, Audrey Callahan was just getting started. Reed looked at Pierce, who was pressed against a rusted support beam with his wrapped arm held tight against his chest, and Pierce looked back at him with an expression that Reed had never seen on Pierce's face in 4 years of working together. Awe. "Who is she?" Pierce said. Reed looked up toward where the second shot had come from, where there was now, again, nothing visible. No presence, no evidence of anything, just silence where a threat had been. "I have no idea," Reed said. And for the first time since the morning, he didn't mean it as a problem. The shooting continued below. His team was holding. The enemy was reorganizing, trying to locate the new variable they hadn't accounted for. And in the upper reaches of the building, a woman they had dismissed as an analyst was systematically dismantling the architecture of an ambush that had been months in the planning. Reed got back on comms. "Hold positions. Keep them occupied. We've got an asset working." Reyes came back immediately. "Cap, are you telling me the intel specialist is—" "Hold positions," he said again. A third shot from a third location, another silence where gunfire had been. Pierce laughed, a short, slightly disbelieving sound that he seemed to produce involuntarily. "She's moving between shots." "They can't find her," Reed said. "They're not going to find her," Pierce said, and now the awe in his voice had settled into something quieter. Something that sounded, Reed thought, a lot like relief. "She doesn't want to be found." Reed thought about the woman who had arrived on the supply truck and signed in and walked across the compound and spoken to no one. The woman who had sat at the end of the briefing table and asked not a single question. The woman he had put in the secondary position and instructed to find cover and stay there. He thought about the equipment case that had been in her hand since before she arrived. I thought about the way she had said, "I understand my role, Captain," with that absolute undefensive level voice. And he thought about the smile, the shadow of a smile when he said, "Don't miss." He pressed his back against the concrete and listened to the battle reorganize itself around a factor that Black Meridian had not planned for that. No one on his team had planned for that. He himself had categorized and dismissed and filed under liability. Somewhere above him, 12 minutes were running, and the woman that nobody expected was making every single one of them count. The fourth shot came at the 2-minute mark. Reed knew it was the fourth because he had been counting, not consciously, not as a strategy, but because his brain had locked onto the rhythm of what was happening above him, the way you lock onto a heartbeat when everything else is noise. 1, 2, 3, 4. Each shot a clean, singular report that cut through the firefight like a line drawn through chaos, and each one followed by a silence that lasted only a moment before the enemy tried to reorganize around the new hole in their formation. They were failing. He could hear it. The communications between Black Meridian positions, and he could hear fragments of it because Caldwell had gotten one channel partially cleared, had changed completely in the 2 minutes since Audrey had taken her first shot. What had been crisp and coordinated was becoming fractured. Short commands turning into questions. Questions turning into something edging toward alarm. They had planned for 12 operators and 1 analyst. They had not planned for her. Cap, Caldwell's voice came through the earpiece, strained and urgent. "I've got partial access to Channel 1. Not enough to call extraction, but enough to hear some of their traffic." "What are you getting?" "They're asking each other where the shooter is. Nobody knows. They're getting fire from different positions every time, and nobody can triangulate because she's not staying still long enough." Reed processed that. "What else?" "They're pulling one of the flanking elements back toward the center. The group that was covering the south exit, they're moving them." Reed's jaw tightened. The south exit. That was the only egress point they hadn't confirmed as destroyed or covered. If Black Meridian was repositioning toward the center of the facility, they might be pulling assets away from that exit, or they might be reinforcing it because they knew it was the only way out and they wanted to seal it permanently. "Pierce," he said, turning to where Pierce was still pressed against the beam, his wrapped arm held against his chest, his face pale from blood loss but his eyes sharp. "How mobile are you?" "Mobile enough," Pierce said immediately. "I need honest." Pierce looked at his arm, flexed the hand once Reed saw the wince he tried to suppress, and looked back. "I can move. I'll be slow, but I can move." "Reyes," Reed said into the comms. "Status." "Holding," Reyes said. Hernandez took a hit on his vest. He's bruised, probably cracked a rib, but he's up. Davis is clean. We're pinned, but stable. The south exit, Reed said. I need eyes on it. A pause, then that's 60 feet of open ground, Cap. I know what it is. Another pause shorter. Give us 90 seconds. Reed looked back at Pierce. Pierce was already straightening against the wall, adjusting his grip on his weapon with his good hand. You're not cleared for movement, Reed said. You need someone at the south exit, Pierce said. Your options are limited. I need you functional. I am functional. Pierce met his eyes. Captain, I've been shot before. This is a graze. It was more than a graze. They both knew it. But Reed also knew that Pierce had operated with worse and done it without complaint, and right now the math was what it was. Above them, shot number 5. The silence afterward was longer than the previous ones, almost 4 seconds before enemy communication resumed, and when it did, it was at a pitch that Reed could hear even through the distance and the noise. Something important had just been eliminated. Move, Reed told Pierce. Stay low, stay against the north wall until you reach the junction, then cut south. Do not take unnecessary contact. Copy, Pierce said and moved. Reed watched him go and then immediately shifted his focus back to the larger picture, because watching Pierce disappear into the interior of the facility was something he could feel but couldn't afford to process. The operational situation was what it was. Every decision had a cost. You paid it and kept moving. He got on comms. All elements. Sound off. They came back one by one. Reyes, Hernandez, Davis. Specialist Torres, who had been holding the north corner alone and sounded like he'd been holding it through sheer anger. Corporal Mac Webb, who reported that the enemy pressure from the east had decreased significantly in the last 3 minutes. They were pulling resources towards something and not the east. Toward the center. Toward whatever Audrey was doing. Reed felt the operational picture reassemble itself in his mind with the uncomfortable clarity of a situation that had gotten worse before it would get better. The enemy was consolidating. They'd taken hits they hadn't expected from a direction they hadn't anticipated, and now they were doing what trained fighters do. When a tactic fails, they were adapting, pulling their distributed formation into a tighter configuration, finding their command element recalibrating. And somewhere above that command element, Audrey Callahan was still moving. Reed pressed to the comms. Caldwell, I need channel 1 full access, whatever it takes. Working on it, Cap. The jamming is sophisticated. They're running a rotating frequency suppression, which means they've got dedicated equipment running it somewhere on site. Find the equipment. A pause. Sir, if we can locate the jamming source, we can destroy it, restore our communications. That's Caldwell stopped. Reed heard him recalculating. That's going to require moving toward the center of the facility. I know. That's where they're consolidating. I know that too. The silence on the channel lasted exactly 2 seconds, which was Caldwell's version of a very long pause. Copy, he said. I'll need cover to move. You'll have it, Reed said, on my count. I was building a new plan in real time, assembling it from the pieces the situation had left him, partial team limited communication. 1 injured operator, an unknown number of enemy fighters who were smarter than average and currently regrouping, and 1 asset that nobody in this facility had seen coming. He keyed the comms and started walking his team through it in the short, clean sentences that emergency planning required when a sound stopped him cold. It was a voice. Not over the comms, not from his team. It came from somewhere in the building interior, loud enough to carry, deliberate enough to be a message, and calm enough to be terrifying. Captain Reed. Reed went completely still. The voice was male, accented Eastern European. He'd place it, though he didn't have enough context to narrow it further. And it was loud, not because the speaker was panicking, but because the speaker was projecting. Broadcasting, speaking to be heard by everyone in the facility, not just Reed. I know your name, the voice continued. I know your team. I know your plan because we built the conditions that produced it. Come out of your positions. Send your people to the south exit. I give you my word that they will be allowed to leave. Every muscle in Reed's body went taut. Your word, he said, not into the comms, but into the open air, loud enough to carry back. I don't know your name. No, the voice agreed. You don't. That's the difference between us. You could have eliminated us 10 minutes ago, Reed said. You didn't, which means you need something. A pause. Appreciative almost. You're smarter than the briefing suggested, the voice said. Yes, I need something. I need the intelligence specialist you brought with you. She has information that belongs to us. Send her to me, and the rest of your team walks out. Reed's hands were very still on his weapon. I don't negotiate personnel, he said. Then your team dies here, the voice said. All of them, including the wounded man moving toward your south exit right now. Pierce. They had eyes on Pierce. Reed's comms lit up immediately. Reyes urgent. Cap, they've got at least 2 elements between Pierce and the south exit. He doesn't know. Pierce, Reed said hard into the comms. Stop moving. Get into cover right now. A beat of silence. Then Pierce's voice very quiet. I've got company. How many? 2 that I can see. Maybe more. Do not engage. Cover only. Wait for my call. Copy, Pierce said, and the word was steady, but underneath it, Reed could hear the particular quality of someone who was calculating their odds and not entirely liking the numbers. Reed looked up toward the ceiling above him, toward the upper level where Audrey was working, and for the first time since she had gone up there, he felt something that was not confidence. It was the old Aurora feeling that comes when a situation turns personal. What is she to you? Reed called out to the voice. A loose end, the voice said. Nothing more. She's an intelligence analyst, Reed said, keeping his voice neutral, buying seconds. She monitors communications intercepts. The laugh that came back was short and genuinely amused. Captain, you are smarter than the briefing suggested, but perhaps not as smart as you believe. The woman you brought here is not an analyst, and I think in the last few minutes you've begun to understand that. The 6th shot came. It was different from the others. Closer, not to Reed's position. The acoustics were wrong for that, but closer to whatever position the voice had been broadcasting from. And the voice after the 6th shot did not come back immediately. There was a gap, a significant gap. And when it returned, it was at a slightly different location, and it had lost approximately half of its projected comm. Last chance, Captain. Reed looked at Caldwell, who had moved up beside him and was working a handheld device with both hands in the focused desperation of a man who understood exactly how much was riding on the task he'd been given. Tell me something, Reed said to Caldwell low. 30 seconds, Caldwell said, not looking up. Maybe less. I need less. Then 20 seconds, Caldwell said, which Reed knew was not actually 20 seconds, but was Caldwell's way of saying he understood the stakes. Reed got back on comms. Reyes, Davis, on my signal I need a full push from the north maximum noise maximum movement. Make them think we're rushing their position. Don't actually advance but make it sound like you are. Webb Torres, same from the east. Create the impression of a coordinated assault from 2 directions. And what are we actually doing? Reyes asked. We're giving Caldwell the seconds he needs and pierce the window to get clear. Copy. Torres, ready. Ready, Cap. Reed looked at Caldwell one more time. Caldwell met his eyes briefly and gave a single nod, the kind that means I need 2 more minutes, and I know you can't give me 2 more minutes, and I'm going to do it anyway. All elements, Reed said. Mark. The facility exploded with coordinated noise, his team executing the false advance with a precision that sounded, Reed hoped, like imminent, catastrophic threat. The enemy response was immediate fire pouring in from multiple positions toward the sound of his team's movement, the command voice going silent as Black Meridian's attention snapped toward the perceived assault. Pierce, Reed said into the comms. Move now. Moving, Pierce said, and Reed could hear in the single word the exact quality of a man running in pain and adrenaline, and something that had more to do with will than physiology. Shot 7, shot 8, 2 in rapid succession, closer together than any previous pair, and the enemy fire that had been focused on Reyes's position suddenly lost half its volume as 2 of the guns contributing to it went permanently silent. Cap, Reyes said, and her voice had something in it that Reed had heard very rarely in 4 years. She just took out both of the guns covering our north position. Simultaneously. Not simultaneously, Caldwell said, not looking up from his device. Sequential, but under 3 seconds apart. From 2 different positions, Reyes said. She moved between shots. The silence on the comms lasted a moment. She moved between shots, Webb repeated, and he said it the way you'd say, I don't understand what I'm looking at. I know what I see, but I don't understand it. Reed understood it, or was beginning to. He thought about the case she had carried since before she arrived. He thought about the rifle assembled in 60 seconds without a tremor in her hands. He thought about the way she looked at the firefight around her and seen not chaos, but patterns, intervals, geometry. The way a chess master looks at a board and sees not pieces, but mathematics. He thought about her saying, "I don't miss." "Caldwell," he said. 10 seconds, Caldwell said. "I'll take them." He looked at the ceiling again. 8 targets down. He didn't know how many remained. He didn't know exactly where she was. But he could track her movements in broad strokes through the changes in the firefight. Every shot was followed by a repositioning of both her and the enemy. And the enemy repositioning had been getting less coordinated with every minute. They were scared. Trained, experienced fighters who had staged a perfect ambush, who had studied his plan and built their trap around it, who had thought they had accounted for every variable. They were scared because there was something in the building they couldn't locate and couldn't stop, and it was taking them apart one position at a time. Reed had been in combat long enough to know what fear does to even well-trained fighters. It compounds. The first loss tightens the grip on the trigger. The second loss starts the second guessing. By the 5th or 6th, coordination breaks down because people stop trusting the structure they were trained in and start acting on individual survival instinct. And the moment they start acting individually, they stop being a formation and start being a collection of separate problems. Black Meridian was approaching that point. "Got it," Caldwell said. Reed's head snapped toward him. "Channel 1. Partially clear, not full strength, but enough. Get me extraction." Caldwell was already on it, the words coming out crisp and urgent. "Coordinate situation personnel status." Reed listened with one ear and kept the other on the sounds of the building around him, the changed rhythms of the firefight, the positions of his team, the trajectory of a situation that had been catastrophic 30 minutes ago and was now improbably tilting. "Extraction confirmed," Caldwell said. 40 minutes. LZ is hot. They're looking for an alternate. 30-minute window, Reed said. "Cap. Tell them 30. We'll make 30 work." Caldwell relayed it. Reed was already moving, pushing toward Pierce's last known position with the particular kind of controlled speed that is not quite running, but is everything running can be without sacrificing attention. He found Pierce 60 feet in behind a rusted structural column, pressed flat against the metal with his weapon up. 2 Black Meridian fighters who had been between Pierce and the south exit were no longer a problem. One of them had taken a precision shot from above that neither Reed nor Pierce had heard in the noise of the larger fight, which meant Audrey had seen the threat to Pierce and handled it before either of them knew it was critical. She had seen it from wherever she was in the upper level of this facility. She had seen it and dealt with it in the middle of everything else she was managing. Reed reached Pierce and gripped his good shoulder. Pierce looked at him with an expression that mixed exhaustion and something that hadn't fully resolved into an emotion yet. "There were 2 of them," Pierce said. "I know. I had an angle on one. The other one," he stopped. "She got the other one. I didn't even hear the shot clearly. He stopped again. "Cap, who is she?" "Later," Reed said. "Can you move?" Pierce pushed off the column and demonstrated that he could move by moving. Reed fell in beside him, covering the angles Pierce couldn't cover with his arm. Compromised, and they made their way back toward the rest of the team with the focused economy of 2 people who had done this enough times to do it without talking through it. The 9th shot came while they were moving. The 10th came 11 seconds later. And then for the first time since the firefight began, the incoming fire decreased below half of what it had been at its peak. Not stopped, not broken entirely, but cut significantly, measurably cut, and the remaining fire was chaotic, overlapping, multiple positions, shooting at things that weren't there. They were shooting at shadows, because the only target they had, the only thing that had been hitting them, had not stayed in one place long enough to become a target. Reed reached the position where Reyes and the rest of his assembled team had consolidated and found them exactly as he'd expect, ready, controlled, watching him for direction. "Status," he said. "Reyes, all elements accounted for. Pierce is the only significant injury. Hernandez is functional. Enemy, we count at least 8 positions neutralized, possibly 9. The remaining ones," she paused. "They don't know what to do, Cap. That's the honest assessment. They're firing, but there's no coordination left. Because their command structure has been taken apart," Reed said. I thought about the voice that had called to him, The calm accented certainty. Send her to me, and the rest of your team walks out. He hadn't heard that voice since the seventh shot. He didn't know what that meant yet, but he had a forming hypothesis. Where's the communications jammer? He asked Caldwell. Northwest corner of the main structure. Based on the frequency pattern, it's got to be a portable unit, something they brought in. Can we reach it? Caldwell looked at the route. If the coverage from the north holds, maybe, it's still covered by at least 2 enemy positions. Was, Reyes said. Reed looked at her. She was looking at the ceiling. One of those positions just... She tilted her head slightly, listening to the change in the sounds of the building. I count 9 distinct points of silence since she started. The Northwest... She paused. Cap, the Northwest has been quiet for 3 minutes. Reed felt something he wasn't sure he had a name for. Not relief, not yet. Something that preceded relief. The recognition that something enormous was happening, something he had not planned for, something that was not his skill or his strategy or his 11 years of experience doing this work. Something that was entirely her. Caldwell, he said. Northwest corner. Go. Caldwell moved. Mac Webb fell in as his cover, and the two of them crossed the distance toward the northwest corner with the focused efficiency of operators who'd been waiting for exactly this kind of clear tasking. Reed watched them go and then pulled back to think, because the situation was still live and there were still unknown threats, and 30 minutes to extraction felt like a very long time. Shot 11. The remaining incoming fire stuttered, not stopped. But the rhythm of it changed from sustained and purposeful to reactive and fragmented. Individual weapons firing at angles that didn't coordinate with each other. A formation doesn't fall apart in a moment. It falls apart in stages, each stage making the next more likely. Reed had watched it happen to enemy units before from the outside, and now he was watching it happen from the inside in real time, and the thing that was producing it was a single woman with a rifle who had refused to stay still long enough to become a target. His earpiece crackled, not comms, something else. Then Caldwell's voice, very tight. Cap, northwest corner. I found the jamming unit. Destroy it. Already done. A beat. Full comms restored on all channels. Reed closed his eyes for 1 second. Just one. Then he keyed his primary channel and began talking to extraction. It was during the detailed necessary mechanics of coordinating extraction with an LZ that was still partially hot during the assessment of Pierce's injury for medical prioritization during the specific operational minutiae that compound in the aftermath of a broken ambush that something shifted in the building. The remaining enemy fire, which had been fragmentary and increasingly desperate, stopped. Not reduced, not decreased, stopped. Complete silence rolled through the facility like a wave. Reed's team heard it before they processed it, and what they did when they heard it was go, still weapons up, breathing controlled, waiting for what came after a silence like that. Like that, nothing came. 30 seconds, 60 seconds. Reyes was the first to say it out loud, and she said it the way you say something you're not quite ready to trust. They're gone. Or repositioning, Torres said. Or gone, Reyes said again. Reed keyed comms. Audrey, status. Nothing. Callahan, report. Silence on the channel. Then after a moment that felt longer than it measured, clear, she said. Her voice was level, slightly different than it had been before she went up. The specific quality of a voice that has just been through something intense and is currently managing the transition back to ordinary communication. Confirmed, Reed said. Their command element attempted to relocate at minute 9. I tracked the movement. A pause. They won't be relocating again. Reed processed that for a moment. Are you hit? A brief pause. Negative. Come down, he said. We've got extraction incoming. Another pause longer. Then copy. Reed lowered the comms and looked at his team. They were looking back at him with a quality on their faces that was uniform, but which each of them was wearing differently. Reyes with the controlled intensity of someone still processing. Pierce with his arm wrapped and his face pale, and something in his eyes that was not the usual Pierce at all. Torres and Webb and Hernandez with the specific quality of people who had been through something that exceeded the vocabulary they'd prepared for it. Listen up, Reed said. We have 30 minutes to extraction. Pierce is priority medical. Caldwell, I need you on comms for the duration. Everyone else wounded assist equipment, recovery, and eyes on the perimeter until we are absolutely confirmed clear. He paused. And when she comes down, he said, you give her room. whatever she needs, whatever she asks for. Is that clear? Nobody asked who he was referring to. They said yes, Captain, in various forms, and they moved. Reed walked to the base of the staircase that led to the upper level. He waited. He heard her coming down before he saw her quiet, deliberate footsteps. No hurry, no stumbling urgency. The footsteps of someone who had finished a task and was walking away from it with the same composure they'd brought to starting it. She came into view on the lower staircase with the rifle broken down and returned to the case which she was carrying in her right hand again. Her clothing was marked with concrete dust and something darker on her left knee, a scrape from moving position, probably not a wound. Her face was calm, the same face from the briefing room, the same face from the supply truck. Reed looked at her for a long moment. He was aware of his team behind him watching. 12 minutes, he said. She nodded. 11 confirmed, she said, and 12 engaged. You knew when you came in, he said. You had the layout memorized. I prepared it, she said simply. Who briefed you? I was given what I needed. She paused. What your team needed. Reed thought about Major Voss's face when he'd asked about Callahan's field experience. The specific bland confidence of someone who knew something they weren't sharing. She's an asset. She'll be useful. Useful. I thought about standing in that corridor thinking she was a liability. He thought about 12 minutes that had saved his team, his mission, and probably his life, executed by the person he had instructed to find cover and stay there. He should have said something that encompassed all of that. Probably there were words for it, but what came out was simpler and more honest than anything he'd planned. I owe you an apology, he said. She looked at him steadily. You owe your team an extraction, she said. Focus on that. Then she walked past him, past the assembled team, and found a position along the north wall where she set down the equipment case and leaned against the wall and looked at nothing in particular. And it was only then, only in that moment of stillness, that Reed noticed her hands. They were shaking, very slightly, almost imperceptibly. The hands that had assembled a rifle in 60 seconds, that had made 11 shots without a miss, that had not trembled during a firefight that would have paralyzed most people, those hands, now that the work was done and the silence was real, were shaking. He didn't say anything about it. He turned back to his team because that was what she had told him to do, and because some things deserve to be seen and not remarked upon. 30 minutes to extraction. The facility was silent. And outside, the desert wind was doing what desert wind does, moving through the damage without judgment, carrying the sound of nothing at all. The helicopter didn't come in 30 minutes, it came in 43. Those extra 13 minutes were the kind that don't pass, they accumulate. Every one of them sitting on top of the last, adding weight to a silence that had already said everything it was going to say. Reed's team held their positions without being told to. Nobody talked much. Pierce had been moved to a sitting position with his back against the north wall, 15 feet from where Audrey was standing, and someone had given him water, and he was drinking it slowly and watching her the way you watch something you're trying to understand and keep failing to. Audrey had not moved from the wall. Her hands had stopped shaking within the first 5 minutes. Reed had been watching for it, not obviously, not in a way that she would have noticed, but watching the way a commander watches everything in a situation that has officially moved from active threat to managed uncertainty. The shaking stopped and didn't come back, and she stood with the equipment case beside her and looked at the middle distance with the expression of someone who was very far inside their own head and had decided that was where they needed to be right now. Reyes came up beside Reed at minute 8 of the wait. She's not okay, Reyes said quietly. She's operational, Reed said. That's not what I said. He looked at Reyes. Diana Reyes had been his second in command for 3 years, and she had a specific kind of intelligence about people. Not psychological analysis, not training, just the accumulated wisdom of someone who paid attention. She was one of the best readers of human condition Reed had ever worked with. She's coming down, Reyes said. After something like that, the focus required the decisions, the sustained pressure of that kind of work. There's a drop. You know what that looks like. I know what it looks like, Reed said. What are you going to do about it? I thought about Audrey's instruction from the bottom of the staircase. You owe your team an extraction. Focus on that. He thought about the way she had said it, not dismissive of the apology, but redirecting. Putting the operational need ahead of the emotional one with the practiced efficiency of someone who had been doing exactly that for a very long time. Nothing right now, he said. She doesn't want anything from us right now. Reyes looked at him steadily. How do you know? Because she's standing by herself and she hasn't moved, he said. If she wanted something, she'd ask for it or she'd come to us. She's not doing either. Reyes considered that. Then people who are used to being alone in crisis don't always know how to ask. Reed didn't have an answer for that one. He filed it and kept watching the perimeter because the perimeter still needed watching until extraction arrived, and because Reyes was right in a way that was going to require more than the next 30 minutes to address. At minute 14, Caldwell picked up movement on the southeast approach. The word movement did a specific thing to every person in the building. A collective tightening weapons coming up positions, shifting without a word exchanged. Reed was at Caldwell's side in 4 steps. What are we looking at? He said. Single signature, Caldwell said, studying his scanner. Moving slow, very slow, could be injured, could be deliberate. He paused. Could be a probe. Distance 200 meters in closing. Reed turned to Torres and Webb. Southeast cover position, do not engage unless fired upon. They moved. Reed got on primary comms. Extraction, this is Kestrel Actual. We have single unidentified approach from the southeast. Confirm your ETA. The response came back immediately. Kestrel Actual extraction is 7 minutes out. Hold your LZ, 7 minutes. The single signature kept moving. At 150 meters, Caldwell said, it's not tactical movement. No cover-seeking behavior. Just walking. Walking, Reed repeated. Straight line, slow pace, like they want to be seen. Reed looked at the southeast wall. He thought about the voice that had called out to him during the firefight. The calm, accented certainty. The offer to let his team leave in exchange for Audrey. He thought about 11 shots and 12 engaged, and he thought about what Audrey had said about the command element attempting to relocate at minute 9. They won't be relocating again. She got their commander, Reed said mostly to himself. What, Caldwell said? Their command element. She said she tracked the movement and engaged at minute 9. If their commander is down, that's why the formation collapsed so completely. They didn't just lose positions, they lost the person holding the positions together. He paused. So who's walking toward us? Whoever's left, Caldwell said. Whoever decided that walking slow and straight toward the building is better than whatever their other options were. At 100 meters, Reyes's voice came over comms from the southeast position. Cap, single male, middle-aged. He's holding both hands out from his sides. Reed processed that, both hands visible, no weapon presented. He's surrendering, Pierce said from his position against the wall. His voice was rough with pain, but his mind was clearly still working. Or he wants to look like he is. Could be a trigger man, Torres said over comms. Body-worn device. Possible, Reed said. Reyes, do not let him approach within 50 meters until we have extraction overhead. If he stops and holds position, let him hold. Copy, he's stopping. A pause. He's stopped. 40 meters out. He's another pause, different quality. Cap, he's sitting down. He just sat down on the ground. The silence that followed that piece of information was something Reed would think about later. Not just the fact of it, but the texture of it. A man sitting down in the desert 40 meters from the building where his operation had just been taken apart. Not running, not fighting, not trying anything. Just sitting. He's done, Pierce said quietly. Don't assume, Reed said. But Pierce was right, and Reed knew it, and the knowing of it layered onto everything else he was carrying in the moment. The weight of the operation, the cost of it, the specific and enormous fact of what Audrey Callahan had done in 12 minutes inside this facility. Extraction arrived at minute 22. The helicopter came in hard and fast the way they do. When an LZ is marked hot and Reed's team moved toward it with the organized efficiency that trauma and training produced together, Pierce was supported by Hernandez on one side and Webb on the other. Caldwell was last off the building perimeter, his scanner still running until the moment he stepped onto open ground. Reed was counting heads when he realized Audrey had not moved toward the helicopter. She was still at the north wall. He crossed the floor in 8 steps. Callahan, we're moving. She looked at him. Something in her eyes had the slightly unfocused quality of a person whose mind was still partially somewhere else, still up on that upper level, maybe still moving between positions in the dark, still doing the calculations that had kept 11 people alive. The man outside, she said, southeast approach. We've got eyes on him, Reed said. He's sitting down. I know, she said. He sat down because he was the only one left to sit down. She looked at Reed directly. His name is Victor Shenko. He was Black Meridian's logistics coordinator. He doesn't have operational command authority. He had nothing to do with the planning. He's the man who made sure the equipment arrived. She paused. He's also the one who's been trying to get information to our side for the last 4 months. He couldn't get it out. He ended up inside the operation he was trying to expose. Reed stared at her. How do you know that? He said. Because my real assignment was him, she said. The operation, the team, the facility, all of it was secondary. I was sent here to find Victor Shenko and bring him out. The helicopter rotors were loud and getting louder as the pilot held the hover, and Reed was aware of the time pressure and aware of his team boarding and aware of 11 things that needed his attention in the next 90 seconds, and he was standing absolutely still, processing what Audrey had just told him. You let us go in thinking this was a neutralization operation, he said. It was a neutralization operation. It was also an extraction. For him, yes. And you didn't tell me. The extraction of Victor Shenko was classified above your mission clearance, she said. The people who designed this operation decided that if the primary team knew about the secondary objective, their behavior would change in ways that could compromise both objectives. She held his gaze. I didn't design that decision. I operated within it. Reed looked at her for a long moment. His jaw was tight. The kind of tight that comes not from anger alone, but from anger mixed with the uncomfortable recognition that the argument he wanted to make would require him to ignore things he knew were true about how classified operations work, the compartmentalization, the need-to-know architecture, the decisions made above everyone's pay grade about who knew what and when. He knew those systems. He worked inside them. He still hated this. Is he compromised? Reed said. If I bring him out on this bird, am I putting my team in additional danger? No, she said. He's been waiting for this. He's cooperated with everything we've communicated to him. He'll come peacefully. And the intelligence he's been sitting on for 4 months, enough to dismantle 2 additional Black Meridian networks, she said. Names, locations, financial routes, 12 months of inside information. She paused. That's why they wanted me. Not for what I know about him, for what he's given me that I'm carrying out of here. Reed closed his eyes for exactly 1 second. 1. Then he opened them and turned to the helicopter and signaled the crew chief with a sharp gesture, hold 1 minute, and turned back to Audrey. Go get him. She picked up the equipment case and walked toward the southeast exit without hesitation, and Reed watched her go and then turned to make sure his team was loaded and accounted for because that was his job. And because some decisions get made in a single second, and then you live with everything they mean for a very long time afterward. She came back with Victor Shenko in 4 minutes. I was a heavy-set man in his 50s with a gray beard and the eyes of someone who had not slept properly in several months. He walked beside Audrey with his hands still visible from his sides, an old habit from the desert, and he looked at Reed when he reached the helicopter with an expression that was simultaneously exhausted and profoundly relieved. Thank you, Shenko said, and his voice had the accent Reed had been cataloging since the firefight. Not the same man who had called out to him. The voice was similar regional origin possibly, but the quality was different. Where the other voice had been cold and controlled, and certain this one was genuine and rough and worn down to its elements. Reed nodded once and said, get on the bird, because that was what the moment required, and because everything else could wait for the debrief. They lifted 40 seconds later. Reed sat across from Audrey in the helicopter cabin, the noise of the rotors making conversation functionally impossible, without the headsets which most of the team had on. Pierce was beside him, his arm properly immobilized now by the crew medic, his face gray with pain but his eyes tracking steadily. Shenko sat near the rear with the careful stillness of a man who had stopped trusting his body to make the right choices and was now managing it deliberately. Audrey had her headset off. She was looking out the window. Reed watched her for a moment and then made a decision that he knew was not entirely professional and did not care. He leaned across the space between them and said loudly enough to cut through the rotor noise, not loudly enough for the whole cabin to hear. How long have you been doing this? She turned from the window. He had to read her lips slightly because of the noise. Doing what? She said. This, the case, the 12 minutes. She looked at him for a moment, and for the first time since he'd met her, he saw something cross her face that wasn't the contained, settled competence she'd worn through everything. Something older, something that had been carried a long time. Long enough, she said. He held her gaze. That's not an answer. No, she agreed. It's not. She paused. 11 years since I was 24. He processed that. Same duration as his own career. Parallel tracks through the same years, the same landscape of classified operations and mission packages and early mornings in buildings that smelled like industrial dust and old concrete. He'd been on the outside of every operation commanding the visible element. She'd been the thing the visible element didn't know about. Does it ever feel? He stopped because he wasn't sure what he was asking. She looked at him steadily. Lonely, she said. He hadn't used that word, but it was the right one. Sometimes, she said, and then quietly, most of the time you don't notice because there's too much to focus on. It's only in the quiet afterward that you feel it. She looked back toward the window. The quiet is the hard part. Reed sat with that. The helicopter banked southeast, carrying them away from Red Rock Canyon and the mining facility and the desert that had held 12 minutes that would live in his operational memory for the rest of his career. Pierce had closed his eyes, not sleeping, managing. Reyes was on her headset, already beginning the operational summary that Brass would need within the hour. Caldwell was doing the same, and Victor Shenko, sitting at the rear of the helicopter with his hands folded in his lap and his gray beard and his 4 months of intelligence that would dismantle networks that had killed people and would kill more people if they kept running. Victor Shenko was looking at Audrey with an expression that Reed, watching from across the cabin, could only describe as gratitude rendered down to its most honest form. Not theatrical, not performative. Just the look of a man who had sat in the desert and waited, and was now on a helicopter, and the person who had made that happen was sitting 15 feet away. Reed thought about the mission briefing, the clean intelligence package, the facility layout, the enemy assessment. He thought about Major Voss's face. He thought about the personnel update that had landed on his desk 2 days before deployment and that he had read for 30 seconds before filing under liability. I thought about a lot of things in the noise of the helicopter cabin, and none of them resolved into anything clean or simple. Because the thing about discovering how wrong you've been is that you can't unknow it. You can't go back to the moment before you knew and make a different choice. You can only carry the knowledge forward and try to do something useful with it. He was still thinking about all of it when they landed at Forward Operations Base Kestrel 40 minutes later. The debrief started immediately. Reed's was first standard post-operation review, casualties and equipment and operational deviation from plan. He sat across from Major Voss and 3 other senior officers and walked them through everything in the precise clipped language of official reporting, and when he reached the point where the operational narrative required him to describe Audrey's role, he stopped. He stopped, and he looked at Voss, who was looking back at him with an expression that was carefully neutral, in a way that meant it was deliberately carefully neutral. You knew, Reed said, not loud, not accusatory, just a statement. Specialist Callahan's full operational role was classified above your mission clearance, Voss said. You told me she was an intelligence analyst. She is an intelligence analyst, Voss said, among other things. Reed looked at him for a long moment. The other officers at the table were doing their best impressions of furniture. She saved 11 lives today, Reed said, my team's lives, using a capability that you knew she had and that I didn't know about when I built my operational plan. Your operational plan was designed to be effective without knowledge of her secondary capability, Voss said. The mission structure accounted for this. The mission structure put her in the secondary position, Reed said, away from contact, because I assessed her as a liability. Yes, Voss said, and she repositioned herself effectively within the operational parameters she'd been given. Reed stared at him. He could hear the careful construction of every word Voss was saying, the institutional architecture of plausible procedure of decisions made above everyone present in this room of a system that had decided this was the correct way to deploy this particular capability and had also decided that the mission commander didn't need to know. He thought about Audrey in the helicopter saying, I didn't design that decision. I operated within it. How many operations, Reed said. How many times has she gone in like this, attached to a primary team who thought she was something else? Voss didn't answer that one, which was an answer. Reed sat back in his chair and completed the debrief with the same controlled precision he'd maintained through the operation itself, because the debrief was what the moment required, and because the things he needed to say to Voss and to the institutional structure Voss represented were not things that belonged in an official record. They belonged somewhere else. He found Audrey 2 hours later. She was in one of the smaller briefing rooms off the main corridor, sitting at a table across from two intelligence officers Reed didn't recognize, in the middle of what was clearly a very detailed and very classified debrief of her own. The door was partly open. He could see her profile, the same composed face, the same level quality answering questions, with the careful precision of someone transferring information that had to arrive exactly right. Viktor Shenko was in the next room, visible through the window. Two different intelligence officers, also talking, also answering questions. His hands were around a cup of coffee, and his posture had the specific exhaustion of a man who had held something for a very long time and was only now beginning to set it down. Reed stood in the corridor for a moment and watched both of them through their respective windows, and he thought about the architecture of it. Two people, parallel rooms, parallel debriefs, carrying between them the intelligence that had been the actual mission all along. The firefight, the facility, the 11 shots, all of it had been the structure around this. The container that got these two people to this moment. He felt something shift in how he understood the operation. Not smaller, not diminished, but differently dimensioned. He had been inside it as the primary element, as the visible thing that moved through space and made noise and drew attention. And around him and through him and behind him, something else had been moving, quieter, more deliberate, aimed at a different target entirely. I thought about chess again, not pieces on a board. The whole game, every move, every position, and the players who could see 12 moves ahead. Reyes appeared beside him in the corridor. "How'd your debrief go?" she said. Voss confirmed everything by confirming nothing, Reed said. "It's on." "Classic." She looked through the window at Audrey. "Hers has been going on since we landed." "I know." "The intelligence officers who came in for her debrief, I checked their credentials. They're not standard intel division." Reyes paused. "They're out of a division I've heard the name of twice in 11 years, and never in any context I was invited into." Reed looked at her. "Which division?" She met his eyes. "The kind that doesn't show up on any organizational chart I've been cleared to see." The corridor was quiet around them. Somewhere down the hall, Pierce was in the medical bay getting his arm properly assessed, and Caldwell was finishing his own debrief, and Torres and Webb were probably in the mess eating their first real food in 20 hours. "She's been doing this for 11 years, Reed said. Reyes looked at him. "She told you that on the bird." "That means she started when she was, what, 24 and 24, Reed said. Reyes was quiet for a moment. "And nobody ever told any of the mission commanders?" "Apparently not." Another silence. Reyes looked through the window again. Audrey was still answering, still precise, still giving the intelligence officers exactly what they needed in exactly the form they needed it. "She's very good at being invisible," Reyes said. "She's excellent at it," Reed said. "I wonder," Reyes said slowly, "if that's something she chose or something that was chosen for her." Reed had been wondering the same thing. Since the helicopter. Since the bottom of the staircase when she'd redirected his apology back toward the operational requirement. Since the briefing room 2 days ago when she'd sat at the end of the table and asked not a single question, and he'd filed her under liability without a second thought. I thought about 11 years of mission packages, 11 years of arriving at operations where the primary team saw her and thought analysts liability secondary position. 11 years of carrying a case that everyone saw and nobody asked about correctly. 11 years of doing the thing that saved the mission and then sitting quietly in the corner afterward while the team debriefed around her. 11 years of quiet. He looked through the window one more time and then turned away from it because watching felt like something she hadn't consented to. "Get some rest," he told Reyes. "Tomorrow's going to be administrative and political, and none of it's going to be simple." "When is it ever?" Reyes said and went. Reed went back to his bunk and sat on the edge of it and thought about a woman who had arrived on the second supply truck and signed in at the security desk and walked across the compound without speaking to anyone carrying an equipment case that contained the thing that saved 11 lives. I thought about the specific quality of courage that asks for nothing back, the kind that does the work and then sits against the wall and doesn't speak and shakes hands that nobody is supposed to see shaking and gives a redirecting answer when someone tries to thank them. He thought about what it cost, not the mission. The mission was over. The mission had cost what it cost and paid what it paid, and the accounting of it would be done in briefing rooms, in official records, in the specific language of institutional acknowledgement. I thought about what the 12 minutes had cost her. Not tactically, not professionally. The human cost, the thing that had produced the shaking hands, the faraway eyes on the helicopter, the particular quality of exhaustion that was more than physical. The cost of doing the hardest possible thing alone in a building full of people who didn't know you were doing it, and then coming down the stairs afterward and picking up your case and waiting for the helicopter. The cost of 11 years of that. He thought about Rhea's question, whether the invisibility was chosen or assigned. And sitting on the edge of his bunk in the buzzing fluorescent quiet of Forward Operations Base, Kestrel Reed made a decision that had nothing to do with his rank or his mission clearance or his 11 years of commanding tactical operations. He was going to find out. Not today. Today had used everything everyone had, and the only responsible thing was to let people recover. But when the operational aftermath cleared the debriefs, the reports, the inevitable institutional conversations with Voss and whoever was above Voss, when all of that settled into whatever it was going to settle into, he was going to find Audrey Callahan and ask her the question that Reyes had asked and that he didn't have an answer to. Not because it was his right to know, it wasn't, but because 11 years was a long time to be invisible, and someone who had just saved his team deserved to have at least one person in the world who was actually curious about the answer. He lay back on his bunk and closed his eyes and was asleep in under 2 minutes, which was the fastest he had fallen asleep since before the mission began. Down the hall through 2 corridors, in a security door, in a small briefing room with a partly open door, Audrey Callahan was still talking, still giving them exactly what they needed, still for the moment invisible. Reed slept 4 hours. He woke at us to 3:40 with the particular clarity that comes after combat, sleep not rested exactly but reset. The fog burned off and what was underneath was sharp and specific. He lay on his bunk for 60 seconds doing the accounting that always came in the first minutes. After something significant, who was okay, who wasn't, what needed to happen in the next 12 hours, the next 24. Pierce was in the medical bay. The arm had required 3 hours of surgical work. The Grays had caught a tendon, which the field rep had managed but not solved. He'd be non-operational for 6 to 8 weeks. The surgeon had said functional recovery was expected to be complete. Reed had read the report twice. Schenko was in a secured room 2 buildings over, guarded by 2 of the intelligence officers who had arrived for Audrey's debrief. His debrief had run until midnight. Reed had gotten a summary that told him almost nothing specific, which was standard for intelligence at that clearance level, but the 2 sentences he could read between clearly said that what Schenko had been carrying was exactly what Audrey had described. Enough to take apart 2 networks, 12 months of inside information. Audrey's debrief had run until 01:30. Reed knew this because he'd been awake at 01:30 for reasons he didn't fully examine, and he'd heard 2 sets of footsteps pass his door, her footsteps and those of someone escorting her. Probably, though, he hadn't opened the door to confirm. He got up at 3:45 and went to the mess. She was there, sitting alone at the far end of the long table with a mug of something coffee, probably, though it could have been tea, and a file folder open in front of her that she was reading with the focused attention of someone trying to hold information, still that kept wanting to move. She was in fresh clothes. The concrete dust was gone. Her hair was pulled back differently than it had been the day before, a slightly different arrangement, which he noticed the way you notice anything that changes when you've been studying a thing without meaning to. She looked up when he came in. Neither of them said anything for a moment. Then Reed went to the coffee dispenser, poured himself a cup, and walked to the far end of the table and sat down across from her. Not close enough to be presumptuous, close enough to be a choice. She watched him do it. "You should be sleeping," she said. "You should be sleeping," he said. "I had a debrief. I know, I also know it ended at 01:30 and it's now 03:45. She looked at him steadily. "Are you tracking my schedule, Captain?" "Mason," he said, "and I'm a light sleeper. Occupational hazard." Something moved across her face, not quite a smile, but adjacent to one. She looked back at the file in front of her, made a small notation in the margin, and then closed it. What do you want to know? She said. He appreciated that she went straight to it. No performance of not knowing what he was there for. No social maneuvering. Reyes asked a question on the helicopter, he said. She asked whether the invisibility was something you chose or something that was chosen for you. I heard her ask it, Audrey said. You were both loud enough. What's the answer? She looked at the closed file for a moment. Both, she said. In the beginning, it was chosen for me. Someone identified a capability and designed a role around it. The structure, the cover of the case, the way I arrive at operations, that was institutional design, not mine. And now I've been inside it long enough that I'm not sure where the structure ends and I begin. She said it evenly without self-pity, the way you'd report a fact that had been verified through extensive testing. That's the honest answer. I know it's not a clean one. Reed drank his coffee. It was bad. The overnight mess coffee was always bad, and he drank it anyway because the act of doing something with his hands made the conversation feel less like a deposition and more like what it actually was. Two people talking in the middle of the night after something that had cost them both. 11 years, he said. In that whole time, how many mission commanders knew what you were? She thought about it, not performing the thought, actually thinking. 3, she said. 2 were briefed before the operation. 1 figured it out on site like you did. She paused. You're the first one who came to find me afterward. Reed sat with that. 3 out of 11 years. He tried to calculate the number of operations that 11 years in that role would produce 30-50 more if the tempo was high, and arrived at the picture of a woman moving through dozens of operations, carrying a case, being categorized as support staff, being positioned away from contact, and then doing the thing that saved the mission, and then sitting against the wall, or sitting in the corner of a helicopter, or sitting at 0345 in a mess hall reading a file because sleeping felt too far away to reach. Does it bother you, he said, when they don't come to find you afterward? She looked at him directly, and for the second time, he saw that thing cross her face that wasn't contained. Competence, the older thing, the carried thing. The ones who don't come, she said, usually don't come because they're processing something that makes them uncomfortable. And the thing that makes them uncomfortable is the distance between how they saw me when I arrived and what they found out I was. She paused. That gap is difficult for people. It implies something about their judgment that they'd rather not look at directly. I'd rather look at it directly, Reed said. I know, she said. That's why you're here. The mess was empty except for the 2 of them and the overnight cook in the back, who was doing something with pots that produced a periodic clanking sound. The fluorescent lighting did what fluorescent lighting does, which is to make everything slightly more honest than it would be in warmer light. It was the kind of setting where things that would be deflected in daylight stayed on the table. Reed put his mug down. I told my team you were a liability, he said. The morning of the mission, I told Reyes I needed to manage you as a liability. I know, she said. You know, I've been called worse, she said, and I've been called worse by people who then owed me their lives. It's a common arc. He felt that land. Not harshly, she said it without an edge, but it landed. Does the arc get old? He said. She was quiet for a moment. Yes, she said. Just that. Just one word, and it carried enough in it that she didn't need to say anything more. He nodded. He understood what was in it. Not fully, he couldn't fully understand something he hadn't lived, but enough. The specific fatigue of proving yourself in the same way to person after person, operation after operation, and knowing that the proof was the price of admission and it was going to be charged every single time. I was about to say something else when the door to the mess opened. Major Voss walked in. He saw them immediately. There wasn't much to see at 0345 in an otherwise empty room, and his face did a quick calculation that Reed watched happen in real time. He walked to the coffee dispenser, poured himself a cup, and then walked to the far end of the table and stood rather than sitting, which was a specific choice. Captain Reed, Voss said. Then Callahan. Major, Audrey said. Her voice had shifted, not unfriendly, but more formal. The shift of someone putting a layer back in place. I wanted to find you both before the morning brief, Voss said. He was looking at Reed when he said it, which Reed noted. There are some developments from the overnight intelligence processing. Shenko's information, Reed said. Partly, and partly something else. Voss set his coffee down. The 2 networks that Shenko's intelligence identifies, one of them has a domestic operational presence. 3 cells currently active. The intelligence officers are moving to coordinate interdiction within the next 72 hours. Good, Reed said. The second network is more complex. Voss paused. Black Meridian is not as neutralized as we'd hoped from last night's operation. They had a contingency structure that wasn't in our intelligence picture. There is a secondary command element that was not present at the facility. Reed went still. How many, he said. Unknown, but functional, and aware that their primary operation just failed. Voss looked at his coffee. They're aware of the Shenko extraction, which means they know what he's carrying. Which means they want him back, Reed said. Or Voss said carefully, they want to prevent the information he's carrying from being fully transferred and processed. The mess was very quiet. Reed looked at Audrey. She was looking at Voss with an expression that was very controlled, and he was beginning to understand that very controlled meant something specific when it was on her face. You're not just telling us this as an update, Reed said to Voss. Voss said, there's an operational request coming. Voss set his mug down with the careful deliberateness of someone managing a conversation they know is going to push back. The intelligence officers overseeing the Shenko debrief have identified a specific threat to his safe transfer to the primary processing facility. The transfer needs to happen in the next 18 hours. The threat assessment suggests it will not be safe without additional protective capability. Reed looked at his team in his mind. Pierce in the medical bay with a sutured tendon, Hernandez with cracked ribs, the rest of them coming off an operation that had used everything they had 24 hours ago. My team is non-operational, he said. You know that. Aspects of your team are non-operational, Voss said. Others are assessed as functional. You want to send us back out. I want to transfer Viktor Shenko safely to the processing facility, Voss said. The protective requirement is not large, a small team, fast movement, low profile. Reed stared at him. We had a 30% casualty rate on the last operation, against an enemy who had complete foreknowledge of our plan. This is a different operation. How is it different? Voss paused. Because this time, he said, looking briefly at Audrey, the protective element will be fully briefed on all assets. The silence that followed was the longest of the morning. Reed looked at Audrey. She was still looking at Voss, and whatever she was thinking was happening behind a face that had gone completely still. Callahan, Reed said, quietly. Not a question. She turned to look at him. And something passed between them in that look. Something that didn't require words because it was built from everything the last 24 hours had already said. The 12 minutes, the staircase, the helicopter, the 0345 mess hall, the question about invisibility, and the answer that had been both. It's my call, she said. The operation, the transfer, the risks, those are institutional decisions. Whether I go is mine. She said it to Reed, not to Voss. Reed understood immediately that she was establishing something, drawing a boundary around the one piece of this that belonged to her in front of Voss with Reed as the witness. 11 years of having decisions made for her, of operating within structures designed by other people. And this specific thing was hers. He nodded. She looked at Voss. Give me the full transfer brief, she said. Every piece of it. Not the version cleared for my level, the actual full brief. If I'm going, I go informed. She paused. And Reed commands the protective element. That's non-negotiable. Voss looked at it like he wanted to negotiate it anyway. He took a moment. Reed could see him taking the moment and then said agreed. Then brief us, she said, both of us. Together. Right now. It was 0402. Voss sat down and opened the briefing. For the next 40 minutes, Reed and Audrey sat across from each other in the bad fluorescent light of the overnight mess, listening to Major Voss lay out a transfer operation that was considerably more complicated than he had initially suggested. The secondary Black Meridian command element had 4 confirmed members and at least 2 additional unconfirmed. They had demonstrated the ability to move quickly and to adapt the same characteristic that had made the Red Rock Canyon operation so lethal. They had confirmed knowledge of Shenko's extraction. And they had, according to intelligence, developed in the last 6 hours a probable intercept window during the 3rd phase of the transfer route. Reed asked 17 questions. Audrey asked 11. Together, their questions built a picture that was more detailed than the brief itself, the kind of picture that comes from 2 people who see operational risk from different angles, bringing those angles into contact. Voss answered every question without deflecting, which Reed noted and credited. When it was done, Reed looked at Audrey. What's your read? He said. She thought for a moment. The intercept window in Phase 3 is real. The route the brief proposes goes through a choke point that a four-person element could cover effectively. We need to go around it, which adds 40 minutes to the transfer time. Better 40 minutes than the alternative. He agreed. He looked at Voss. We route around the Phase 3 choke point. I want Reyes and Caldwell as my team. They're the most functional of my available operators. And I want full communication clearance for the duration of the transfer. No compartmentalization that affects real-time decision-making. Voss nodded. Agreed. And I want it on record, Reed said, that this team is operating outside standard post-operation recovery parameters at institutional request. The operational pressure of that request and the decision to accept it belong to this conversation and to your authorization. Voss looked at him for a moment. Noted, he said. Good. Reed stood. Then we have 9 hours before transfer begins. My people need food and rest. Callahan. He paused. She looked at him. Same applies to you, he said. 4 hours minimum. We don't go into this depleted. She held his gaze for a moment, and he could see her sorting through the variables, the operational logic of what he was saying, the institutional habit of ignoring what her body needed in favor of mission requirements, and something else he was only beginning to be able to read on her face. 4 hours, she agreed. She stood, picked up the file folder in her mug, and went. Voss looked at Reed across the empty table. You trust her, Voss said. It wasn't quite a question. I trusted her before I knew what she was capable of, Reed said. I just didn't know I was doing it. Now I know both things. Voss considered that. The compartmentalization of her role, Voss said carefully. I want you to understand that it wasn't designed to undermine mission commanders. It was designed to protect the capability, Reed said. I understand the argument. But you disagree with it. Reed looked at him. I think there's a version of protecting a capability that costs too much in other directions. He paused. She's been doing this for 11 years. In 11 years, 3 mission commanders knew what she was. The rest of them managed her as a support element and then had to reconcile what they thought she was with what she actually did. You know what that reconciliation does to a person? The person being reconciled. Voss was quiet. It makes them invisible in a way that goes deeper than operational cover, Reed said. It makes them invisible to themselves, eventually. He let that sit. I'm not sure that's a cost your institutional design accounted for. He left before Voss could respond because the response he wanted to have would have been too personal for an official conversation at 0445 in a mess hall, and because he had 4 hours to sleep in a transfer operation to prepare for and a team to take care of. I went to the medical bay first. Pierce was awake. Reed had expected him to be because Pierce was the kind of person who was awake when there was something to process and there was plenty. He was sitting up in the bed with his arm immobilized and his face less gray than it had been on the helicopter, which was something. How is it? Reed said. It's there, Pierce said. That's the best I can tell you right now. He looked at Reed. Sit down. You look like you've been up all night. About half the night, Reed said, but he sat. Pierce studied him. What's happening? I can tell something's happening. Reed gave him the compressed version Shenko, the secondary command element, the transfer operation. He left out the 0345 mess hall conversation because that felt like something that belonged to him and Audrey separately from the operational update. Pierce listened with the focused attention of someone who is injured and therefore cannot act and therefore makes up for it with complete cognitive presence. You're going back out, Pierce said when he finished, in 9 hours, with Reyes and Caldwell and Callahan. Pierce was quiet for a moment. Then she's going. Her call, she said yes. Pierce looked at his immobilized arm. Something moved across his face that Reed had seen before, the particular expression of a soldier who has been sidelined by injury in a moment that matters. I should be on that transfer, Pierce said. You should be in this bed, Reed said, and you will be. Cap. Logan. Reed used its first name, which he did rarely, and Pierce heard it for what it was. You did everything yesterday. You moved when I asked you to move, and you held when I asked you to hold, and you bled on the floor of that facility and kept your head clear the whole time. You don't owe this operation anything more. He paused. Let someone else carry it for a few hours. Pierce looked at him for a moment. She'll keep you safe, Pierce said finally. Callahan, she already did once. She'll do it again. I know, Reed said. He meant it. That was the thing, he meant it in a way that had nothing performative about it. No residual discomfort from the recalibration. No complicated feelings about having been wrong. He had been wrong, and he had looked at the wrongness directly, and he knew what it looked like. And on the other side of that was something clean and simple. He trusted her. He trusted her the way you trust someone after you've seen them do the hardest thing at the hardest moment and not fail. He left Pierce and went to find Reyes. She was in her bunk awake, which didn't surprise him. He knocked on the door frame and she looked up. Transfer operation, he said. 9 hours. You and Caldwell. She sat up immediately. And Callahan. Reyes nodded slowly. She agreed to go back out. She did. Reyes was quiet for a moment and Reed could see her working through something. What he said. I keep thinking about what she said on the helicopter, Reyes said. About the quiet being the hard part. She paused. We're about to give her more noise. I know. Is that, Reyes stopped herself. Is that fair? Reed said, finishing it. Yeah. I thought about the mess hall, the closed file, the mug of bad coffee, the way she had said yes to the operation in a room with Major Voss in a way that established the one piece she could establish as hers. Not because she wanted to go, because she was the person who understood both Shenko and the threat to him better than anyone else in the facility, and she knew it, and she had made the same calculations she'd probably made dozens of times in 11 years. She's not going because it's convenient for the institution, Reed said. She's going because she's the best person to make sure Shenko arrives where he needs to arrive with what he's carrying. She's going because the mission matters, and she's the one who can best protect it. He paused. Same reason she went up those stairs yesterday. Reyes held his gaze. And when it's over, Reed said, she gets a real answer on whether the invisibility stays or changes from the people who have the authority to change it. He paused. I'm going to push for that. Hard. Reyes looked at him for a long moment. You like her, she said. It wasn't romantic, and she didn't mean it that way, and they both knew it. She meant something more fundamental than that. She meant the specific kind of liking that is actually respect that has been earned through fire. The kind that changes how you see someone permanently. I underestimated her on day one, Reed said. I'm not planning to make that mistake twice. Reyes nodded. Good, neither am I. He let her sleep and went back to his own bunk and was out in under 3 minutes this time, which was its own kind of statement about where his mind had landed. He woke at 08:20 to Caldwell's knock and the particular morning quality of a base preparing for something. Not loud, not urgent, but with that specific density of purpose that Reed had learned to read over 11 years the way some people read weather. He dressed and went to the briefing room. Reyes was already there, Caldwell. 2 intelligence officers he recognized from the overnight. Victor Shenko, who looked marginally better rested than he had on the helicopter and was sitting with the stillness of a man who had already processed the danger he was in and reached some kind of equilibrium with it. And Audrey. She was at the far end of the table with the equipment case beside her chair. She had slept. He could see it in the quality of her focus, sharper than the lower 345 version, more present, the far away quality, completely gone. She was reading a map laid out on the table in front of her with a pen in her hand, and when Reed came in, she looked up and gave him a brief nod that contained everything practical about the situation. Ready, focused, let's work. He nodded back the same way. He sat down and looked at his team. Reyes, Caldwell, Audrey, and the man they were going to move through a threat window in 18 hours. All right, he said, let's go through it. They went through it. Every element of the transfer route, every contingency, the Phase 3 reroute around the choke point, communication protocols, medical contingencies for Shenko, who was not a combatant and would need management different from an operator if contact was made, the probable intercept window, its timing, its terrain, its available approach angles. Audrey had marked 3 things on the map before he arrived. When he got to those sections of the brief, he found she had already identified the same concerns he was going to raise and had already proposed the same solutions. And he looked at her marks and then at her, and she was looking back at him with the focused practicality of someone who had done the prep work, because that was what you did. You were up early, he said. I was always going to go, she said. I did the work while I was deciding. Shenko, who had been listening to the planning with the attentiveness of a man whose survival depended on it, looked at Audrey and then at Reed and said quietly in his careful English, "She is the reason I trusted the operation enough to sit down in that desert." Reed looked at him. "What? 4 months ago," Shenko said, "when they first made contact with me, when they told me how the extraction would work." He paused. "They told me there would be a woman. They told me what she carried. They told me that when the operation happened, she would be the one who made it safe." His eyes moved to Audrey. They were right. Audrey met Shenko's gaze and something passed between them that Reed recognized as the particular connection of two people who had been in proximity to the same danger from different sides. "You waited a long time," she said. "Yes," Shenko said. "It was." He stopped. "Very long." "I know," she said. "I know it was." The room was quiet for a moment. Then Reed put his hand on the map and said, "Transfer begins at 1800. We have 9 hours. I want everyone rested, prepped, and fully loaded by 1700. He looked at each of them in turn, Reyes, Caldwell, Shenko, Audrey. "Questions? None." "Then let's be ready," he said. He said it to the room, but he looked at Audrey when he said it. She was already looking back at him, the equipment case on the floor beside her chair, her pen still in her hand, the map marked with the 3 things she'd already figured out. Ready. She had been ready before any of them knew this was coming. That, Reed thought, was the truest thing about her. And somewhere in the institutional architecture above all of them, in the offices where decisions were made about who knew what and when and why, something was going to have to change. It was going to make certain of it. The transfer began at 1800 exactly. 3 vehicles, low-profile civilian models. Nothing that broadcast federal operation to anyone watching the road. Shenko rode in the middle vehicle with Caldwell and one of the intelligence officers. Reyes drove the lead vehicle. Reed rode in the rear with Audrey, both of them watching the angles that the vehicles ahead couldn't watch. The equipment case was between Audrey's feet. Nobody talked for the first 20 minutes. The radio stayed quiet, comms were tight channel earpiece only, and there was nothing to report because nothing had happened yet. Reed watched the road behind them and the vehicles around them, and the way the light was changing as they moved further from the base and deeper into the kind of terrain that swallowed things. At minute 23, Audrey said, "They're already tracking us." Reed looked at her. "Where?" "Blue sit-in, 4 cars back. It's been with us since the first turn." She paused. "They picked us up at the gate." Reed felt the cold, specific clarity of a threat that is confirmed moving into the calculation. "How confident?" He said. 90%. She paused. "The other 10% doesn't matter. Behave as if it's confirmed." He keyed comms. "Reyes, we have a potential tail. Blue sedan, 4 vehicles back on our 6. Maintain speed. Do not adjust course yet." Reyes, steady as granite. "Copy. I've got a dark SUV that joined at the secondary junction, 11 o'clock position running, parallel. 2 vehicles." Reed did the math fast. A 4-person secondary command element with resources enough to place 2 vehicles on a transfer route within 12 hours of the primary operation failing, that was not improvised. That was contingency planning built in advance, which meant Black Meridian had expected that if their primary operation failed, Shenko would be transferred within a specific window, and they had assets pre-positioned to respond to exactly that. They had been planned for. Again. "Callahan," he said. "I know," she said. "They built a contingency for the contingency. Same architecture as the facility. They anticipated the response and prepared for it." "Who planned this operation originally?" "Their operation, not ours." She was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. "Someone who knows how we think," she said. "Someone with inside knowledge of our response protocols." The weight of that landed in the vehicle, and neither of them spoke for a moment while it settled. Caldwell, Reed said into comms, "Get me a channel to the processing facility. I need to know if anyone there had foreknowledge of our transfer window." "On it," Caldwell said. Reyes, "Cap, the SUV is accelerating. It's going to be parallel to my vehicle in 40 seconds. Hold course. Do not engage." "Copy." Shenko's voice came over comms. He'd been given a one-way earpiece, receive only, but Caldwell had patched him to the channel so he could hear the situation. He wasn't supposed to transmit. He transmitted anyway. "Captain Reed, the man who planned the facility operation, his name is Drock. Anton Drock. He was not at the facility. He never goes to his own operations." Reed's jaw tightened. And you know this because I moved his equipment for 2 years, Shenko said. I know his methods. He builds in layers. If the first layer fails, the second is already waiting. If the second fails, the third. A pause. He will not stop until I am recovered or eliminated. Drock wasn't in our intelligence package, Reed said. No, Shenko said. He would not be. He is very careful about what appears in intelligence packages, which meant someone was helping him stay careful. Reed looked at Audrey. She was looking at the road behind them with the focused stillness of someone doing extensive calculation behind a still face. You know the name, he said. It wasn't a question. She turned to look at him, and what was on her face was not surprise. It was the specific expression of someone whose hypothesis has just been confirmed in the worst possible way. Drock is in our files, she said. Deep files. He's been a theoretical attribution on 3 operations over 4 years. We've never been able to confirm his role directly because he operates through cutouts and he never touches an operation personally. She paused. Until apparently now. He's personal about Shenko, Reed said. Shenko has 12 months of inside information, Audrey said. Drock's name is almost certainly in it. Once Shenko finishes transferring everything he knows, Drock becomes identifiable, pursuable, prosecutable. She met Reed's eyes. He's not just trying to recover an asset. He's trying to survive. The blue sedan accelerated. Reyes' SUV is matching my speed. They're holding position. They're waiting for something, Audrey said. A third element. They want all 3 vehicles covered before they move. Reed looked at the road ahead. The Phase 3 reroute they'd planned, the deviation around the choke point, was 6 minutes away. If a third element was coming, it would come at the choke point. They'd reroute it around, and when they didn't arrive there, Drock's vehicles would improvise. We need to move before they're set, Reed said. Yes, Audrey said. Options. She didn't hesitate. Separate. The middle vehicle takes an unplanned deviation, not our reroute, something completely off pattern, somewhere they can't have pre-positioned. The lead and rear vehicles draw the tail in the SUV. She paused. Shenko and Caldwell disappear. We become the visible target. That puts 2 vehicles against 2 unknown contacts, Reed said, without knowing their numbers. It puts Shenko in a vehicle they don't know to follow, she said, which is the only thing that matters. He looked at her for a half second. She was right. She was completely right, and they both knew it, and the only question was whether he could execute it before the third element arrived. Caldwell, Reed said, on my mark, you deviate from the planned route. Take the Presco Junction, go north, stay north. Do not use the planned route at all. No comms after you deviate, radio silence until you reach the facility. Acknowledge, Caldwell, acknowledged, ready. Reyes, Reed said, you and I hold our routes. Keep them occupied. Can you manage the SUV? Reyes, I can manage the SUV. Don't take unnecessary contact. Evade first, engage only if forced. Reyes, copy. Audrey, he said. She was already checking the case. Don't, he said. She looked at him. We evade first, he said. That case stays closed unless there is no other option. She looked at him for a moment with an expression he hadn't seen on her before. Something that was partly resistance and partly something softer, which was the recognition that someone was trying to protect her from the cost of using what was in the case, and that she was not entirely sure how to receive that. Understood, as she said. Mark, Reed said into comms. Caldwell, go. The middle vehicle's brake lights flashed once, and then it turned hard right at the next intersection and was gone, and Reed watched the blue sedan in the mirror and the dark SUV in his peripheral and made the count 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 before either of them responded. 3 seconds was an eternity of hesitation. It confirmed what he needed to know. They weren't expecting a split. They had planned for a consolidated convoy, and a split broke their decision loop. The blue sedan accelerated toward the turn Caldwell had taken. They're splitting too, Reed said. Reyes' SUV is on me, moving aggressive. Stay ahead of them. Don't let them get parallel. The next 6 minutes were the kind that Reed had experienced enough times to know how they would feel, compressed and enormous. Simultaneously, every second both faster and slower than it had any right to be. Reyes had the SUV behind her and was managing it with the specific skill of someone who understood that the purpose of the lead vehicle was to occupy attention, not win a pursuit. She didn't try to lose them. She made herself interesting enough to chase and difficult enough to close. Reed had the blue sedan, which had apparently decided after its moment of indecision that the rear vehicle was the better target, maybe because of who they knew was in it. They know this vehicle has you, Reed said. Audrey watching the mirror, probably. Drock's intelligence on the extraction likely included the personnel roster. They want you because of what you know, Reed said. It wasn't a question, but she answered it anyway. I've spent 11 years accumulating information about operations Drock was connected to, she said. If Shenko is dangerous to him, I'm an equal threat. Why didn't you tell me that before we left the base? Because it would have changed how you planned the transfer, she said, and the plan was correct as designed. He stared at her for a moment. This woman he had decided to trust completely, who was still making unilateral decisions about what information to give him and doing it for operational reasons that he could not actually argue with. And it was the most maddening and most clarifying thing he had experienced in 11 years of working with people. Callahan, he said. Mason, she said. After this is over, he said, we are having a very long conversation about information sharing. Something crossed her face that was unmistakably the closest thing to a full smile he had seen on her, just for a moment. There and then gone, replaced by focus as the blue sedan closed to 3 car lengths. After this is over, she said, I'll tell you whatever you want to know. Reyes's voice came over comms, tight and controlled. I've got a problem. SUV is not alone. Second vehicle just joined from a side street. I've got 2 on me now. Third element, it had arrived. Can you hold, Reed said, a pause, Reyes's version of a very long pause, which meant she was doing rapid physical calculation. I can hold, she said, but not indefinitely. Reed looked at the sedan behind them now, 2 car lengths back and closing. He looked at Audrey. She was looking back at him, not at the sedan, and he understood that she was watching him the way she had watched the firefight in the facility, looking for patterns, timing geometry. They're going to try to force us over, she said. 3 car lengths is positioning, 2 car lengths is threat, 1 car length is contact. What do we do at 1 car length, he said. We don't let them get to 1 car length, she said. She turned forward and looked at the road ahead and said, right turn in 400 feet. There's a construction area. There's been an active project on that block for 3 months. Narrow passage barriers, 1 lane of traffic. A vehicle trying to force contact loses its ability to maneuver. You memorized the construction schedule, Reed said. I memorized everything, she said simply. 400 feet. He made the turn, the sedan followed. And exactly as she had said, the construction barriers, the narrowed lane, the single-file passage that required both vehicles to move through in sequence, it stripped the sedan of every aggressive positioning advantage it had built up over the last 6 minutes. They were single-file. The sedan was behind him. The sedan's driver knew it too because Reed could see in the mirror the vehicle slowing, the calculation happening, the recognition that the geography had changed against them. They're on comms, Audrey said, calling it into the other element. How do you know? Because they just slowed down when they had an opportunity to close, she said. They're not acting alone anymore. They're asking for direction. Reyes, my 2 vehicles just backed off, not retreating, holding, waiting for something. Reed looked at Audrey. They're coordinating. They're redirecting, she said, all resources toward 1 target. She paused. Shenko. They've calculated that they can't take this vehicle and they're abandoning the pursuit. They're going after Caldwell. Reed was on comm before she finished the sentence. Caldwell, report position. Silence. Radio silence as instructed, as Reed had told him. Caldwell, Reed said again harder. Silence. The silence lasted 4 seconds, which was 3 seconds too long. Then we've got company, Caldwell said, and his voice had the specific quality of someone who is maintaining calm over something that wants to be panic. Blue vehicle came out of a side road. We're being pushed toward a dead end. Reed looked at the road ahead. He did the distance calculation. Caldwell's deviation route had taken him north, which meant he was now significantly separated from their position. Hold your course if you can, Reed said. We are moving to you. He looked at the driver, who was one of the intelligence officers, and who met his eyes in the rearview mirror with the focused attention of someone who understood the instruction before it was given. North, Reed said. Fast, the vehicle accelerated. Reyes, copy following your lead. They ran north through the city with a focused urgency that doesn't require conversation, every person in both vehicles knowing exactly what was at stake and exactly what they were driving toward and exactly what it would mean if they were too slow. Audrey had the case in her lap. She had not opened it. Reed watched her hands on it, not opening, not putting it down, just holding it, managing the operational tension of knowing what was inside and when it might be needed, and making the decision not to reach for it yet, with the same deliberateness that she made every other decision. Caldwell, they've got us stopped. Dead end as expected. Vehicle is blocking the exit. 2 individuals on foot approaching. Armed, Reed said. Confirmed. Shenko, Reed said. Caldwell. He's a pause. He's calm, remarkably calm. Shenko's voice quiet and steady. I have been waiting for this for a long time. Not specifically this, but this, a pause. I am not afraid. Reed heard something in those words that hit him in a place he wasn't expecting. The specific courage of a civilian who had carried something alone for 4 months through the interior of an organization that would have killed him for it, who had sat down in the desert because there was nothing left to do but sit, who was now in a stopped vehicle with 2 armed men approaching and was not afraid. Audrey heard it too. He could tell because of what happened on her face. Something opened briefly, something that was moved, genuinely moved by the specific quality of what Shenko had just said. 2 minutes, Reed told Caldwell. We are 2 minutes from your position. Copy, Caldwell said. We'll be here. They were there in 90 seconds. Reed was out of the vehicle before it fully stopped. Reyes's vehicle arriving 6 seconds behind, and the situation that Caldwell had described resolved itself visually in an instant. The dead end, the blocking vehicle, 2 armed men who had been advancing toward Caldwell's stopped car, and who now froze at the sight of 2 additional vehicles and 4 additional people emerging with focused and unambiguous purpose. Trained fighters freeze for 1 second when their calculation is wrong. 1 second. Reed moved into that second with 11 years of practice, and Reyes was beside him doing the same, and what followed was not a firefight because it never had to become one. 2 men whose operational calculation had just collapsed, who had expected a stopped vehicle, and a civilian and a single comms operator facing instead a response that had arrived from nowhere in 90 seconds. They made a decision, the same decision the man in the desert had made. They stood down. Reed had them secured in 40 seconds, which was the kind of efficient that comes from doing hard things correctly for a long time. And he turned from them to find Caldwell standing outside his vehicle, looking at Reed with an expression that was pure relief. And beside Caldwell, Viktor Shenko standing in the evening air with his hands folded in front of him and his gray beard and his 4 months of intelligence, looking at Reed the same way he had looked at Audrey on the helicopter. Just grateful, profoundly, simply, completely grateful. Audrey came up beside Reed. Shenko looked at her and said in Russian first and then in English, as if he wanted to make certain she understood both. You came. I said I would, she said. 4 months ago, he said, when they first contacted me. The person they sent the message, they sent it said that when the time came, there would be someone who would make it safe. He looked at her. It was you who sent that message. Reed looked at Audrey. She was looking at Shenko. It was me, she said. 4 months, Shenko said. I held it for 4 months because of that message. Because of you. He paused. I needed to know it was a person, not an institution. A person. Reed understood, then not partially, not in the way he had been understanding things in pieces over the past 24 hours, but completely. The full architecture of what Audrey had been doing, not just in 12 minutes in a mining facility, and not just in a transfer operation through an evening city, but for 4 months before any of them knew this operation existed. She had been the reason Shenko held on. She had sent a message to a man inside a lethal organization and told him to trust her. And she had done it months before she arrived at Forward Operations Base Kestrel in the second supply truck, before she signed in at the security desk, before she sat at the end of the briefing table and asked not a single question. She had been running this operation before Reed had a mission package. I thought about Major Voss saying she's an asset. He thought about his own dismissal secondary position, liability away from contact. He thought about 11 years and 3 commanders who knew and dozens who didn't, and the question of whether the invisibility was chosen or assigned. He thought about her hands shaking against the north wall. He looked at her now and she was not shaking. She was standing in the early dark with Viktor Shenko and looking at something that was the end of something that had cost her considerably, and her face had the quality of a thing completing itself. Not triumphant, she didn't do triumphant, but present, fully, completely present in a way that he realized he had not seen from her until this moment. All the other moments, the facility, the helicopter, the mess hall, the briefing room, she had been present operationally, meaning she was there in every way the mission required. But some part of her had always been in the next calculation, the next contingency, the next thing that needed managing. Right now, there was nothing to manage, and she was just standing there. Reyes came up beside Reed and looked at the same thing he was looking at. She did it, Reyes said quietly. She did the whole thing, Reed said, from the beginning, all of it. Does she know you know that? He thought about the mess hall, the conversation about invisibility, the promise of a long conversation about information sharing. The shadow of a smile when he said, after this is over. She will, he said. They transferred Shenko to a federal vehicle that arrived 12 minutes later, official and marked and accompanied by 4 agents who had been redirected from the processing facility when the comms situation had clarified. Caldwell rode with them for the final leg his expertise needed for the last phase of the transfer documentation. Reed watched the vehicle pull away and stood in the early dark and breathed. Reyes was beside him. Audrey was 10 feet to his left. The 2 Black Meridian members who had been secured were in Reyes's vehicle, bound and monitored to be transferred to federal custody within the hour. The blue sedan from earlier in the pursuit had not reappeared, which meant Drock's contingency had been fully spent. All 3 elements deployed, all 3 neutralized or scattered. It was over. Reed walked to where Audrey was standing. She heard him coming and turned, and they stood facing each other in the kind of quiet that follows something enormous, the kind that doesn't need to be filled. 4 months, he said. 4 months, she confirmed. You reached Shenko 4 months ago, and you've been running him since. Running the relationship, she said carefully. The contact, the trust building, the intelligence transfer protocols. Yes. And then you walked into my briefing and sat at the end of the table, Reed said, and let you tell me to stay in the secondary position, she said. He held her gaze. I'm sorry for that. I said it in the facility and I mean it more now. I know you do, she said. I'm going to push Voss, he said, and whoever is above Voss, the compartmentalization of your role, the way it's structured, so that mission commanders don't know. I'm going to make the argument that it's wrong, not just operationally, personally. He paused. I can't promise it changes anything, but I'm going to make the argument. She looked at him for a moment. Why, she said, not skeptical, genuinely asking. I thought about how to answer that. He thought about the specific thing Reyes had identified in the mess hall when she said she was worried about Audrey not knowing how to ask for what she needed. He thought about 11 years and 3 commanders and the quiet being the hard part. Because you're very good at being invisible, he said. And I think some part of you has been invisible for so long that you're not sure anymore what it would feel like to be seen. He paused. And because you came back out for this transfer when you didn't have to, and you did it because the mission mattered and Shenko mattered, and that kind of person deserves to have someone in their corner who isn't just using the capability. Audrey was quiet for a long moment, the kind of quiet that isn't empty. She looked at him and he saw something move through her face that was not the contained competence and not the faraway exhaustion and not the shadow of a smile. Something older than all of those and more fundamental and considerably more difficult to look at directly. Okay, she said, just that, one word. But the way she said it, like something that had been held against a wall for a long time, had just decided it was all right to stand on its own. 6 weeks later, Mason Reed sat in a conference room on the 4th floor of a federal building in Washington and made his argument. Not to Voss, above Voss, to the people whose names were on the decisions that had structured Audrey's role for 11 years. The people who had decided that mission commanders didn't need to know that the compartmentalization served the capability that the cost of invisibility was acceptable in the architecture of classified operations. I was calm. He was precise. He used 11 years of mission experience and the specific evidence of what had happened at Red Rock Canyon and the specific evidence of what had happened on the transfer, the near miss, the contingency that had almost worked the decision loop that had been broken not by institutional structure, but by 2 people who had built sufficient trust in the preceding 24 hours to make the right call in 90 seconds. Unmade the argument that the compartmentalization was producing operational risk. He also made the other argument, the one that wasn't about operations. He said that a person who had spent 11 years keeping everyone else alive while remaining categorically invisible to the people she was keeping alive had earned the right to be known for what she was, not as an institutional capability. As a soldier, he said it plainly, without decoration, the way you say things that are true. There was a long silence in the room when he finished. Then the senior officer at the table, a woman Reed had spoken with twice in his career, and had found both times to be exactly as direct as her reputation suggested, looked at him and said, "What outcome are you proposing?" "Disclosure," he said. "Standard mission commander briefing, full capability disclosure at assignment. The cover remains for external observation, but internally the people working alongside her know who she is." Another silence. "That's a significant structural change," this senior officer said. "It's a correction," Reed said. The silence after that was different from the ones before it. Shorter, more decided. "We'll review it," she said. He knew from the way she said it that review meant something in that room that it didn't always mean. He nodded and stood and left. 3 days later, Audrey called him. Not a message, an actual call voice only, which he picked up on the second ring. "They told me," she said. "What did they tell you?" "That future assignments will include full disclosure to mission commanders." A pause. "They said a recommendation from a captain with 11 years of tactical operations experience and a specific incident report was a significant factor." "Was it what you wanted?" he said. A pause, longer than her usual pauses. "I didn't know I wanted it until someone argued for it," she said, which I think says something about what 11 years of a particular structure does to your ability to know what you want. "Yeah," he said, "I think it does." "Thank you," she said. "I thought about the mining facility." He thought about the staircase and the bottom of it and the case in her hand and the shadow of a smile when he said, "Don't miss." He thought about a woman who had been keeping people alive from invisible positions for 11 years and had done it without complaint and without recognition and with shaking hands that she didn't want anyone to see. "You don't owe me a thank you," he said. "You owe me that long conversation about information sharing." And this time clear over the phone, unmistakable, she laughed. A real one, not a shadow of a smile, not the contained professional courtesy she deployed instead of warmth. An actual genuine laugh, short and unguarded, the kind that happens when your defenses are down and something is genuinely funny in the specific way that things are only funny when you're also a little overwhelmed. He held on to it. Not because he was being sentimental about it, he wasn't built for sentimental, but because that laugh was the sound of something that had been invisible for a very long time, deciding to be seen, and some sounds are worth carrying forward into everything that comes after. Logan Pierce was fully operational in 7 weeks, which was 1 week ahead of the surgeon's projection because Pierce was constitutionally incapable of being ahead of nothing. He called Reed from physical therapy on a Tuesday and said simply, "I heard what you did in Washington." And Reed said, "Don't make it a thing." And Pierce said, "It's a thing, Cap." And that was the end of that conversation. Diana Reyes, in the official after-action report she submitted for the Red Rock Canyon operation, in the subsequent transfer, wrote in the summary section, in the careful official language of military documentation, that the operation's success was due to exceptional coordination between all team members and specifically credited the intelligence specialists attached to the unit for capabilities that exceeded the parameters of the original mission brief and proved decisive at multiple critical junctures. It was the most bureaucratic possible way to say what she actually meant. What she actually meant was that the woman they underestimated saved everyone. What she actually meant was that quiet competence is not less than loud authority. It is in the moments that matter most considerably more. Viktor Shenko's intelligence, fully transferred in process, produced the interdiction of 2 active Black Meridian networks and the identification of 4 previously unknown financial routes. Anton Drak was formally identified, named, and became the subject of an international warrant within 60 days. He was not a ghost anymore. Shenko's 4 months of patience had made certain of that. The last Reed heard of Viktor Shenko, he was living under a new name in a city he had chosen himself, working a job that involved no weapons and no classified anything, and sleeping through the night for the first time in years. Reed thought that was exactly right. Some people carry things for as long as they need to be carried, and when someone finally comes to take the weight they deserve, to set it down completely. And Audrey Callahan. 6 months after Red Rock Canyon, she took a new assignment. Reed knew because she told him, which was itself the thing. The proof that something had changed, not the assignment, the telling, the fact that she called and said, "I've got something new coming, and I wanted you to know," which was the kind of sentence that requires a person to believe that someone else cares about the information. She was still carrying the case. She would probably always carry the case because the case and the capability inside it were hers, had been hers since she was 24 years old, and no structural change in disclosure protocol was going to change what she was or what she was good at. The quiet, the positioning, the calculation that moved faster than anyone around her could track. The 11 shots out of 12 engagements. The 12 minutes. But now the mission commanders knew. Now they knew what they were working with before they spent 2 days categorizing her as a liability and then had to rebuild their entire understanding of the operation in real time. Now when she arrived, set down the case, and sat at the end of the briefing table, the person running the briefing knew to look at her differently. Not the same way they looked at their weapons specialists or their comms operators or their team leaders. The way you look at the person who is going to make the difference. The way you look at someone you trust. Mason Reed thought about that on the morning he received her call about the new assignment. He thought about the supply truck and the security desk and the briefing table and the secondary position he had put her in while not knowing a single true thing about who she was. He thought about the 12 minutes that had changed everything. Not just the operation. Not just his understanding of a classified capability. His understanding of what courage looked like when it didn't announce itself. What competence looked like when it had nothing to prove. What strength looked like when it came quietly into a room and sat at the end of the table and waited. And waited and waited, and then when the moment came was exactly what it had always been. Enough, more than enough. The kind of soldier who made the difference that nobody forgot, even when they only understood it afterward, and who went on making that difference not because anyone was watching, but because the work was worth doing and the people beside her were worth protecting. That was Audrey Callahan. That was who she had always been. And from the moment Mason Reed finally saw it clearly, he never looked at a quiet room the same way again.